Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial of this leopard. And to start off, I have my line drawing here. This is an 11 by 14 inch format. I print out sections of it and then I tape it together. As you can see, it's two pieces of paper taped together. And then I put this on a window, a bright window, and I put my paper on top of it, and that's how I transfer it to my paper. Speaking of paper, I have chosen an Arches cold press paper, and this is a great paper for blending and soft effects. So I chose this paper for that purpose, and I chose an 11 by 14 format because then we can get a little bit more detail in the eyes and have a little bit more room for our spots to bloom out. So roughly, the plan of attack is that first we'll put on masking. Masking is a liquid plastic that you paint onto your paper. Remember, the white of the paper is the white in watercolor. So to protect the whites for the whiskers, I paint on this liquid plastic, let it dry completely, and then you can paint over it. And it'll save the whiskers, and then at the end of the painting you rub it off, revealing the crisp, white, pristine white paper left behind. So this is a great little product. I will apply it with a old rigger. I've had this for years. I dip the rigger in water. I scrub it on soap, and then I will dip this in my masking and apply the masking. And usually what I do is I'll dip this in the masking, and then on the side of my paper I'll get the excess out, and then I'll be able to get a nice thin line for whiskers. And just repeat every 2 minutes or so. I'll rinse this completely so that the masking doesn't dry in my bristles. If you let the masking dry in these bristles, it will ruin your brush. That's what I did to create my fun little, what I call an octopus brush. I left the masking in this brush and let it dry, and this is a fun way to get interesting textures by dipping this into paint. But this is what happens to your bristles if you get a bunch of masking in it and let it dry. It's like, if they feel like plastic. This was once a natural, just a bristle brush like this. So that's what happens. All right, so that will be our first step. We'll do that for the whiskers and the glints in the eye. Any other white you want to save? I don't think there's any others. Maybe a few of the wisps in the hair we could do. And that will be the first stage of this painting process. The next stage of the painting process is working large to small, from light to dark, in general. And I break that rule all the time, actually, but in general, you want to work from large areas to small. So we'll get everything wet with clean, clear water, not puddling. And we'll drop in the basic colors of this leopard, the yellows and the oranges, and probably do the background too. And a lot of times I like to do the background and the animal together, so parts of the background and parts of the animal melt together to make soft, dreamy edges. That is the trick, to soft, dreamy edges. So that'll be the first step of painting. Then you let that completely dry, probably, because we probably won't have time to use our lamp black to get in the little markings that will be soft. Maybe we will, but maybe our paper will dry too much and we will have to take a break and wait, let everything dry completely. And then when you let everything dry completely, it sets the watercolor into the paper. So after it's completely bone dry, you go back over it with a wet brush, or you spray it to re-wet it for the next layer of paint. That first set layer of paint won't move much. It'll soften a little maybe, but it won't move much unless you use super thick paint, which we will not do in the first stage. And then most likely the second stage in general will be getting the whole cat wet again, not puddling. Let the water soak into the paper, and then we'll take lamp black straight from the tube to paint on the markings so they stay soft, but they hold their shape. If you paint the black spots on this cat on dry paper, it will have hard edges. It will not look like soft, natural spots. So you do not want to paint most of your spots on dry paper. It just won't look good. You might want a couple dry brush looking spots to add variety to the marks that we have. But in general, we're going to want to paint these circular markings all over the cat on wet to damp paper. Probably leaning more towards buckling. If you haven't watched my video, The Watercolor Clock, about different stages of paper moisture combined with different amounts of water mixed into your paint, I highly recommend that, because if you're new to watercolor, that's so important to learn, that you can get so many different effects by pairing different levels of water to paint ratios in your brush paired with different levels of moisture on your paper, ranging all the way from dry to damp to buckling, where your paper has started to buckle because the water has absorbed into it, to glistening, where the water is sitting on top of your paper and it glistens, but it's not buckling yet because it hasn't absorbed into the paper. You can get wildly different results with all those different moisture levels paired with different thicknesses of paint. And I did a whole video on that too, way before Watercolor Clock, that you can watch, that I think is a must-watch video if you have been painting a year or less to understand how watercolor works. All right, so usually the first thing I do though is I tape down my paper to watercolor board. But before I do that, let's briefly go through the supplies that I plan on using. All right, let's briefly talk about brushes. We work from larger to smaller in general. This is my 3/4 silver black velvet oval. It covers large distances. I often like to use this bigger mop brush. It's an Alvaro Castagnet brush that's expensive. I don't recommend it. Any large brush that's a mop brush or something like this 3/4 oval should do just fine. Another brush that I like to use a lot is a bamboo calligraphy brush. I think this is like a size 10, and the reason why I like this is because when you push up into the negative, if you paint negatively into fur, it makes a really nice furry edge, and it makes really nice fur texture. So this is a great little brush to have, and they're cheap. You can get whole sets of these for really cheap. And remember, you can go to rachelstudio.com/supply list to find links to a lot of my favorite supplies. All right, working on down the line, this is an 8 round. This is just my work horse. I'll use this, for example, to dip directly into my lamp black like that and make these very bold markings this cat has, all the dots. I use this a ton, like 80% of my painting time is spent using this brush probably. I'm trying to incorporate using a flat into my work more, because you can get really thin strokes, especially in botanical work. And I just put a mark on my cat, which doesn't matter at all because this is going to get a lot of paint on it. Or you can make a nice wide mark. So I've been trying to use this a lot more. A finishing brush that I use a ton is a scrubber. You can use this to scrub out pencil lines. You can use it to soften edges. You can use it to erase. You dip it in clean, clear water and you work on set, dried watercolor paint. So when your paint is completely dry and set, you can use this to reactivate dried paint, and especially on this Arches cold press paper, not all papers will take a stiff scrubber like this. That's another reason why I like Arches cold press paper, because I can use this stiff scrubber to do all kinds of softening and blending and blurring and erasing and taking out graphite lines. These graphite lines, once you get them wet, they set. And the only way to erase them after that is to either paint over them darkly enough they don't show, or erase them with a scrubber. And by the way, to put my line drawing on here, I just use a number 2 pencil. This is just a simple number 2 pencil that I use to trace my line drawing from my original line drawing I did in Photoshop. I do have a whole video on my YouTube channel about how to do a line drawing like this using a free app, a Sketchbook Pro. So look for that on my channel or ask me about it. So that's that. That's the scrubber. I have a smaller scrubber as well. I have soft scrubbers that I use on hot press papers or more delicate papers. This is my rigger. It's a longer bristled brush with a thinner bristle, and I use this for line work or for whiskers smaller, longer lines. And this is my size 2 round, and I use this for very small details like little eyeliner details, little nostril details, just any small detail work. At the end of the painting usually is when I use these 2 round or a 0 round or a double 0 round, depending on how precise you want to get. So those are my brushes, and that's what we'll be using. As far as colors, I anticipate using quite a lot of burnt sienna and quite a bit of yellow mixed with that for a more yellow ochre color for this cat's markings. I will probably use a lot of French ultramarine mixed with burnt sienna for the background. I will probably use permanent green light mixed with a yellow or maybe Winsor green gold for the eyes. And I will use a lot of Daniel Smith lamp black for the black parts. I will probably use some transparent pyrrole orange for some more redder leaning areas. I don't anticipate using my M. Graham Naphthol red. And the last time I painted this, I just made it a simple blue-gray background to make the oranges pop, but I might put a little bit of green in the background too to tie in with the green in the eyes. So that's something to think about. But no matter what colors you have, it's not as important what colors you use as getting your values, your lights, mediums, and darks right. So if you get your lights, mediums, and darks right, the colors that you actually use to paint this leopard will be less important. So don't stress out about getting my exact mix, my exact yellow plus burnt sienna orange for the fur color. It won't matter. What will matter is getting your mediums, medium, your lights, light, and your darks, dark. That's more important. So stress out about that. If you want to find something to stress out about values and getting your drawing correct. That's why if you're new to art at all or not a great drawer, I highly recommend that you just do a tracing and use my tracing to get the main subject down on your paper, because 1, you don't want to draw on your watercolor paper, it will damage it. 2, what you will learn as you get more experience as an artist is, even though you use the line drawing, a tracing, as you get paint on this, that tracing is going to disappear and you will get plenty of practice of drawing skills, I promise. So don't start out with drawing unless you just want to spend time practicing drawing skills too. I want to spend time practicing painting skills. They're 2 different skills. So that's my little spiel on that. The other thing that I would say, if you're more of a beginner, you might want to skip using the masking. It's just one more complication of the painting process. If you're brand new, you don't have masking, you're not used to masking, you can use Kuretake white ink. And for an even easier way to do things like whiskers, if you're brand new to painting or fairly new, and getting these thin little lines takes years of muscle memory practice to get these whiskers really delicate and thin and perfectly curved. And to make it easier on yourself, you can just use a white gel pen. I will not be doing that. But instead of messing with masking and getting your mark really feather light touch, and it's really quite hard, remove some of the frustration by just using a white gel pen. You got to get a fresh one, and I recommend getting the Broad Uniball Signo white gel pen. I'm sure I have a link to that in my supply list. So make it easy on yourself. If you are learning so many things, learning to do whiskers is just yet one more thing of difficulty that will add frustration to your art journey that you don't need if you're in your first, say, year or 2 of painting. But if you are more of an intermediate painter, definitely practice getting your whiskers refined and thin and beautifully curved by doing it with masking. So just depends on where you are in your skill level, what path you want to take with the whiskers. All right, shall we get this taped down? To stretch or not to stretch? Stretching watercolor paper, I feel, is unnecessary. Some people hate any buckling at all as they work. To me, I've been painting forever. I'm used to buckling. And if you have your paper taped down, it will flatten back out. So some watercolorists go through this whole rigmarole of putting the paper in the bathtub, letting it dry, stapling it down, stretching it, and going through all that. I don't do that. A lot of really good watercolor artists don't do that. They just start with a fresh piece of paper, get your line drawing down and then tape it down. I use Nito soft, it's Holbein soft tape off Dick Blick. Again, this is in my supply list. I just tape it down with this and move on. I don't go through the whole ceremonial work of stretching my paper. I tape it down to a piece of backing board that framers use, and I put white duct tape on mine for both aesthetic reasons and also to make my backing boards last longer, and I have had many of these for many years. So they're just lightweight boards. You can also use gator board, or you can use those signs that politicians use and yard signs during political campaigns. Any lightweight material, you can get cardboard and wrap it in white duct tape. I do recommend white so that the color of your duct tape doesn't mess with your eyes. The same thing with washi tape. I don't use pretty, colorful, decorated washi tape because all those colors mess with your eyes when you're painting. So I don't recommend using that. I recommend using masking tape. And I tape down one of the long sides first. Make sure you have it burnished down so you don't get water under it. And then I'll do a short side.
Mom.
Yeah, baby.
And my secret is tell you our music and the game is okay, Mom?
Okay.
That's what I want to do. Okay, it goes dun dun dun, but after that, it goes dun dun dun, dun 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 dun.